Here we go. We're going to see how this goes.
I get to see into the hearts of coaches and athletes so quickly.
We can have this adrenaline rush in the moment and still be the image bearers of Christ that we are called to be.
My passion is for the life of Christ to be lived out through me.
I mean, Seth turned a little red when he was talking. It was really, really
I
good.
get really excited.
We want to find an easier time. We want to find a better time. And it's never going to appear. The best time is now.
Zach, you're dropping proverbs on us, man.
My work as coach is a minister of the gospel.
Man, I am looking forward to more conversations around this. You guys are the best.
All right, welcome back to the Competing Biblically podcast. Nick, Seth, and Pancake with us today, and today is the start of season 2. We've gone through the Competing Biblically framework itself, and now we're diving into one of the resources that has really helped shape it, the Handbook on Athletic Perfection. But before we do that, Nick and Zach, how are you guys doing on this day?
Fabulous. It's a great day for a great day, as my 5-year-old says. So, my little guy just turned 5, and we're having a party for him tonight. So, it's a great day. Got some really good stuff going on. And Seth and I tried to make some videos yesterday, which was funny.
Trying is the key word.
Yeah, be on the lookout for some failed attempts, some blooper reels, and then some good stuff that we're going to get done in the weeks to come. But excited about the handbook, excited about season 2. Glad to see your faces again.
Yeah, I think excited is just always our go-to word. But I think it's really cool starting this new season of the podcast, talking about going back to one of the resources that shaped so much of like what we talked about this summer and before that. But starting this new season podcast as I start a new season of competition. It's just really cool seeing like new things starting in sports and school, and then now in our podcast of just being able to, oh no, here's another thing for me to use and keep me accountable as we go throughout this new season, especially in the fall where we're not playing so much competition. I think this book really, Nick said it when we were preparing for it earlier. Most of the podcasts that we've done so far has focused so much on these ideas and these concepts, and we've related them to how we can apply those things, how we can use them as a team, as a coach, as an athlete for other people. But this book does a really good job of giving us first that inward view of how that affects our lives, how that affects how we think and the way we do things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree, Zach. I definitely agree with what you said, it being a good time. Starting a new season of the podcast with a new season. I know, so we're recording this on Friday, the Friday before it's going to release, the Friday heading into Labor Day weekend. Here in Delaware, yesterday morning, I know felt kind of like the first fall morning, and this morning kind of felt the same. I'm loving the cooler weather in the morning, and our team, this upcoming week is our first game week. I know high school football starts tonight, so it's definitely, I'm excited for fall to be here and that new season, and of course walking through some of this material. I know this is material all of us have been through, mostly through at least once, and kind of going back through and seeing more. So like Zach said, this handbook, and I think Nick alluded to as well, this handbook helps shape the Competing Biblically framework. And the first season, we walk through the Competing Biblically framework itself. This is still a Competing Biblically resource, so just because we're not walking through the same framework or the framework itself, this isn't becoming a Handbook on Athletic Perfection podcast. We're still talking about the Competing Biblically framework, and this isn't different, but it's not the exact same. It's kind of a resource that helped inform and shape that framework. So we're going to relate many of the things we talk about and read to that framework. And you'll see and hear a lot of the same terms. In this intro that we're going over today, the microcosm of life is something that's brought up here, and that was talked about a lot through the Competing Biblically framework. So I'm excited. And this resource is available at Cross Training Publishers. We encourage you to walk through it with us if you want. And Ron Brown from Kingdom Sports does videos on each. He doesn't have one on the intro, but each of these chapters, he has videos, and he does a lot. He expands upon them, kind of relates it to himself and shares his experience and kind of a teaching on it. So you can go to kingdomsports.online and look at the videos on the handbook on athletic perfection there, and that would be another great thing to dive into if you're looking for more. So we're just going to get all that out on the jump, and we'll put the link to that in the description of the show. But season 2, episode 1, firing on all cylinders here.
Yeah. So this handbook on athletic perfection is actually the genesis of the Competing Biblically stuff that we have kind of taken from Scotty and from other folks and just organized it in a way that made sense to us. Yeah, I mean, Scotty was very heavily influenced by Wes Neal, who wrote this book, very influenced by this book itself as he started trying to look at what does it look like to compete biblically, and as he started to build his life on these principles. So, yeah, it's not its own separate thing. It's if anything, we're looking kind of back to the Genesis, and a lot of the handbook is really like personal sanctification stuff. There's a lot of really good individual application, and I think with the Competing Biblically framework, the stuff that like 4 channels of blessing and all that stuff, and how we interact with one another, it kind of comes from these places. We're gonna talk about things like motivation and goal and attitude and audience and all these things that like are personally happening internally. And then I think where we get with the framework with things like the overs and the verses and the foundation is it starts to flesh out towards the world around us. That's when Matthew 5:16 happens, like that our light starts to shine, the people see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. So yeah, I'm excited. And even like the Genesis, as I was just reminded to watch the video from Wes Neal introing into this, the Genesis of this handbook kind of comes from a place of him not competing biblically. He was a weightlifter with Athletes in Action and thought that he had things figured out and realized that he didn't at a moment where he was lifting weights and his fiance was in the room and didn't hit the weight that he wanted to hit and threw the weights down and pounded his fists. And that's kind of where this book came from. I think he says here in the intro that he just started writing verses that had to do with competition on index cards and started to build this catalog and kind of came up with these 18 different categories that we're going to dive into over the next couple months. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. And it also, this makes me think of like when I started wrestling with this whole competing biblically thing, it reminded me of a story of me and Lindsay, my wife, before we were dating, before we were anything more than just friends and interns together. We were playing a game of pickup basketball, and it was college kids versus high school kids, and our college athlete team had a couple non-athletes on it that were getting exposed and were causing us to lose the game. And a high school kid goes in for a layup to win the game, and I wrapped him up, and we ended up on the ground. It looked like I tackled him, and I still wrapped him up, and we went to the ground. And I remember Lindsay calling me out and saying, "Well, did that glorify God?" And my response was, I'm embarrassed about this, but it's funny because it's not the right response, but my response was, "Okay, sin police." Okay. Yeah. And then I just responded with no easy buckets. So that's completely like the way that the world handles things. I mean, and then from that moment on, really started wrestling with the handbook. I actually got the handbook that next summer or that year and started working through it. And yeah, it kind of was the genesis of my journey as well. It was a moment of failing, a moment of not having an attitude and actions that do glorify the Lord.
Yeah, and I think rolling into the introduction, you talked about it is personal application. I think you see that a lot in what he says is the desire for writing, like the results for writing this handbook. And he says, "It is my desire for Jesus Christ to become the center of your athletic life. It is also my desire that as you learn to fellowship with Jesus during your athletic performance, you'll experience a deeper walk with him in all other areas of your life. So you definitely see a lot of personal sanctification in there, not as much of the on mission piece that we focus on a lot in competing biblically, but it's so true because so many times faith in Jesus Christ is something that we tack on, we add on. We may do some character development or some spiritual development that we do at the beginning or end of practice, or we may pray before or after games, but making Christ an actual part of our physical act of competing is a whole different level. And it's not a level I think a lot of us, I mean me even, for a long time, I didn't experience that in my walk with Christ. And even now, I'm still working on it and having to be very intentional about making Christ a part of my athletic life.
Yeah, and if you can, I don't want to say master. So obviously, like we talk about, like our definition of winning is different than the world's definition of winning. And one of the big proponents of that is we have a different our definition is about closing the gap. Our definition is glorifying God by the power of the Spirit as we look to close the gap between our potential and our performance, as we look to integrate our faith into sport. And man, if you can do it in the pressure cooker or the Instapot, if you can do it there, then man, we'll see later in the intro, but if you can do it there, we can win other places in our life. It brings it. This is practice, not just for practicing our sport, but we're practicing and training ourselves in godliness as we interact with a really difficult place. Practice, workouts, adversity in competition, adversity in relationships through sport, man, is a great place for us to learn how to do it everywhere else.
Yeah, and I think that part is what is so important, is when we realize our new definition of winning isn't so much winning a championship, getting a winning record, getting a starting spot, getting awards. That is the goal, is training in godliness through our sport. That is when sports becomes worth something. So I know, like, this next part that Wes talks about, he said, many gifted athletes quit sports because they cannot relate Christianity to athletic competition. And so, like, I was there for a long time. Like, by the time I was done high school sports, I didn't want to play in college because I stayed at home. I had a really cool opportunity, and that's why I ended up playing. I didn't try to get recruited. I didn't try to go send my tapes everywhere. Like, I just talked to a coach that I knew, and he happened to have a spot. And now, obviously, God's will was in that. But even in college, realizing, like, man, like, this isn't the same, because I know I'm not supposed to be playing for winning. I know I'm not supposed to, like, I knew the way I played in high school wasn't a reflection of what I believed and what I said I believed. And now playing in college, knowing what I believed, being confident and firm in that, I didn't see a point to sports. It was just very much like, oh, like, well, I dedicate all this time. I don't get any scholarship money. I don't see what the point is. But as I've read through this book just this summer, it's changed my mindset so much on, like, my personal reason for playing sports. And I was talking about this last night. Our church has a college group. And so a couple of people there, I was talking about how much time. I did the math and sat down, and when I looked at that from a practical standpoint, it's like, oh, I could be working a full-time job on top of school, and, like, I would still have time in my days. But now seeing sports the way I do now because of this handbook, because of the things that we are talking about, I view sports as a full-time job of doing ministry, of, like, that is my only purpose for being on the lacrosse team. Yes, I'm going to do everything that I can to play well. Yes, I'm going to try really hard to be good. But it's for the purpose of showing who Christ is and what he's done in my life. And so, like, it's just been an incredible transformation. I know, talking to Noah Given, just of some of the things that we've thought through and want to do differently this season, I think, like, it's just so exciting to be able to apply this stuff. And so I'm so glad we're diving into this now.
Yeah. And Zach, as you're sharing that stuff, I think one of the big things that we have to overcome in that question of why a lot of Christian athletes do not have or don't see the purpose in sport, don't see the connection, is because they're looking for what they can get out of it. And I think that that's, again, what you can apply in the pressure cooker reaches other places. So if we're not able to apply, like if we're just looking at, that's selflessness versus selfishness. So we have to be able to root that out as we're evaluating our life, because there's tons of things that I want to do today. I got a job, got a wife, got kids, got birthday party, and I have to lay my yes down to serve them. And it kind of starts with this question: why sports? Why should Christians take a vested interest in sport?
Yeah. And what I think too, Zach, about the quote that you shared about why people quit is, think about if someone comes to Christ and their life is being transformed. All of a sudden you open the word and it comes alive. All of a sudden, worship comes alive. All of a sudden your school, your participation in school, your work looks different. But so many times what happens is everything else is transformed. And Nick, you've alluded to this in your story about Kutztown camp this past summer, but every area of our life is transformed. And if the same thing doesn't happen in our athletic life, then we see our life as being this new transformed life. And then our athletic participation still seems like part of this old life. And it's so easy to do if we don't bring, God, if we don't bring Christ into that and see it as a vehicle for him to use and shape us. So I think that's huge. And you're absolutely right, Nick, because I think Wes talks about this in later chapters, is if you're using sport to achieve recognition and selfishness, and then you grow or come to faith and realize you shouldn't be chasing those things, and you don't set a new goal for participating, then you see your participation in athletics as ungodly because you're chasing ungodly things. So it's important to reshape and transform our goal and our purpose for participating.
I am so guilty. Like Seth, what you're saying, that was my whole experience in sport. It was all about what can I get out of it? What recognition can I receive? So of course you come to Christ and it's like, well, I'm not getting those things and I'm not supposed to care about those things. So what am I supposed to care about? And that's really Jesus' desire. Like the whole Romans 12, 1 and 2, our spiritual act of worship and laying our life down as a living sacrifice in response to the mercies of God, that we are not going to be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That's what you were alluding to, Seth, and God wants to transform every area of our life, not necessarily. And look, we'll jump into these things here. Like Wes gives these 4 examples of reasons why the Christian should remain in sport. And the first one, he talks about this verse from 1 Corinthians 7. He says, he said, brethren, let each man remain in his condition in which he was called. I'm not saying that God wouldn't call you to something else, but if you were called if you come to Christ as an athlete, it's a big part of your life. God may not be calling you to abandon it, but rather to use that platform, to use what he's given you for his glory and to be shaped by it, like to allow him to be able to shape you in the midst of even though it's the same world, it's a whole new world because you're seeing it through a whole new lens.
Yeah, sometimes when we come, and God does call people right from the outset, but when we make a commitment to follow Christ, God doesn't, unless he directly calls you, he doesn't call you to this new place, but he changes and transforms life as you've seen it. He takes those, and I think I was talking with you about this yesterday, Nick. God doesn't take every moment and make every moment this mountaintop moment and take us to these great places of status and recognition necessarily, but he takes those mundane moments of life and he makes those things holy. Those things that you were already doing, that you were doing for yourself, that were like a dry wilderness, he puts life, his spirit, into those things. And athletic competition is no different. So a place that you were probably self-seeking, and it was a place of selfishness and self-centeredness, and probably a dry wilderness, a longing for something that you weren't getting. Well, Christ wants to put new life into that. He doesn't call us out. Now, there are sins and practices that he calls us out of, but I mean, participation in athletics is not some sinful act that God has called us out of. He's called us to be transformed by him in the way that we do it. I mean, it's similar to life. Like, God calls us to be transformed in everything we do in life. He doesn't necessarily take us away from everything that we've done. And athletics is no different.
Yeah, and I think that carries so well into this next point. And Seth, like something you just said that I literally was just talking about myself last night, is this second point that Wes talks about. It says, the talents you have been given are from God and are designated for a purpose. And he talks from Proverbs 16:4 when he says, the Lord has made everything for its or his own purpose. And so like the little section below that talks about how you have a responsibility, because God has given you that, to invest those talents as wisely as you would for anything else that God has given you. So I know, like in church, we talk a lot about finances and where we spend our talent. Like in Lifehouse, in my church, we talk about talents, treasures, and something else. And I can't remember the
time.
Yeah, time, talent, and treasure. And so we talk about all these things. And so when I became a Christian and started living out my faith, I saw sports as a shameful thing because of what you just said, Seth. I was chasing, even though I told everybody I don't care about personal recognition, I loved personal recognition. I still struggle with getting personal recognition because every time I know I'm not supposed to be chasing those things. And so I wanted, for the longest time, I didn't want to play sports anymore because of it. And I wanted to hide, I literally wanted to hide my talent. And so I made a joke with Abby last night about lacrosse and about my athletic ability. I was like, man, the way I see my athletic ability is the same way one of the servants in the parable of the talents was.
Wow.
I saw my athletic ability as a talent that I was given by God, and I wanted to hide it. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't think about investing it as God had given it to me. So instead, now that I know what I know, it's so different. And it was just so, it's just such a stark change from my senior year of high school, receiving some of these awards and like not knowing what to do with it because I wasn't going to go out and say that, oh man, I love being glorified, but I did. And now coming into my senior year of college, and just, I mean, the other day we had a team meeting and Coach C was handing out awards from last year, and I had all academic award, and I know Nick talked about it, but the second team all conference award, which is incredible. But now I get to receive those things and then put them back to God, point people back to God and my teammates. I get to say, well, of course I got second team all conference. I had an incredible defense playing with me. But like on top of that, I also was playing for the right reasons. Like God has given me such an incredible ability to be out here, to be able to play well, be able to play with this program, be able to play with these guys. And so like, it's just so incredible to see the talent that I have, not as this shameful thing of me chasing my own recognition, but a God-given talent that he has given me to use for him.
As we have been getting ready to film these videos and share this stuff in a more concise Bible study type format, what you're describing, the words that have come to me are our job when we deal with glory now is to reflect and to deflect. But that's our job, is to reflect and to deflect. That we want to be the moon in terms of when people see us, we want to be shining the light of Christ, not our own light, not calling us to attention, but reflecting his glory to others. And then in those moments where our talents or whatever it is, where those moments where we used to want, and I'm with you, I'm a glory hound. I like to be recognized. I like to be known, but there's freedom in deflecting that. There's freedom in saying, yep, teammates, yep, no, that's the Lord. I can't, that's God, praise God. It's kind of like when people give me compliments, the phrasing the Lord has given me is just like, well, praise God, thank you. Thank you for saying that, and praise God. He deserves the praise for that. That's awesome. But you don't have to be embarrassed or shamed by it, because I think that's the enemy. And I think honestly, as we walk through these reasons for why to continue in sport, as we walk through these reasons, I think Satan is on the other side of these, trying to pervert that stuff, trying to say, oh, there's no point. Yep, you got to go do something else. You can't do what you're doing now. Yep, those talents are selfish. You should not, Satan's on the other end of it, feeding those negative emotions. Our flesh is on the other end of that, feeding the negativity.
Yeah, and Nick, what you said about reflecting and deflecting glory kind of goes into our third point as well, which is, as an athlete, you have the built-in platform of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. And this, I'm going to point out one of the quotes. I think it's the third sentence in this section. It's not because necessarily that you're successful or all of the fame and recognition you have, but this is what Wes says. They listen not because he is an expert on the subject, but because they have a familiarity with him. So sometimes people feel like they need to, and we hear this a lot, I can have success and then I can share the good news of Jesus Christ. Well, our sharing of the gospel of Jesus Christ is not based on our success, because it's not because we're successful that people listen to us. Now, they may listen to what you have to say on your sport of specialty, but when it comes to the gospel, they listen because they know you. Think of as a coach. I know when I started coaching and players started calling me coach, I never realized the weight of that title or that name. That is until when my players realize I was there for them and they get comfortable with me, and all of a sudden they started asking me about things not related to soccer. And what I said actually seemed to matter to them. And again, that's not because I know a lot about soccer that it mattered to them, but because they knew me and I knew them. And so as an athlete or a coach, you have the opportunity to share, not because you're successful, but because you spend so much time with them. So I challenge you to think about the time that you're investing, that you're spending with these people. And that is the built-in platform to share Christ with them. Let alone the fact that you're sweating together, you're working out together, and you're pushing each other. The nature and environment of sport is perfect for sharing.
Yeah, it's doing life together. That's honestly. So that this just kind of came out. We weren't planning on talking about this, but that's the Christian life, is that we're meant to live life together, and sport as a microcosm of the rest of life. We are going to spend a lot of time together, meals, sweat, fun, tears, all of it together is what the church is designed to be. And we get a snapshot of that in sport.
And that's what this fourth point that he goes on to is: you will understand more clearly how to apply God's word to your non-athletic world as you apply it to your athletic performance. And so when we start to see our sport and our community in our sport and how those things apply to the rest of our life, we're going to be able to understand how to be a better Christian. We're going to understand how to have a better and deeper relationship with Christ. And because of our deeper relationship with Christ, we'll have a deeper relationship with the people around us. And I think, Seth, even as you just shared about that last point, I love what Nick said of just like, you can see the enemy on the other side of that, of just how, like Seth, you were talking about, I spend 30, 40, 50 hours a week with 40 guys that I will get to know better than most people in my life. because I spend so much time with them so frequently. And I can just see the enemy wanting to pull me away from that, because I have so much opportunity to share, because guys are familiar with me, not because I'm an incredible athlete, not because I've been on the team for a long time, but because they know me, because we spend so much time together. And so I can just see Satan pulling away from that of, oh, those guys don't really care about you. You don't really need to stay on that team. You can leave, you can go do something else. But yeah, I thought that was just a really cool point.
As I look at all these points put together, Zach, that's really well said. And as I look at all this stuff kind of culminating together, I forget which point it was. Might have been point 2 about purpose. I mean, all these things kind of tie together, and we talked about this early on in season 1. What is our purpose as Christians? So we would say, Westminster Catechism would say that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. John Piper edited that a little bit and said is to glorify God by enjoying him forever. So the question is, how do we glorify God? Individually, we glorify God by being transformed into the image of Christ, that we are no longer conformed and now we're being transformed, which is a lot of what we've talked about over the past 30 minutes, is being transformed into the image of Christ, this personal work, inwardly working out, outwardly in sport. And then the even like from there, the bigger picture is that God created us in the purpose of us being in his image. The purpose for God creating us in his image and likeness is that we would fill the earth with image bearers. And we get to do that through sport and through your work and through all these other places. But sport is just, it's this special moment in time where you're able to participate as an athlete, where you're able to participate as a coach, where you're able to participate as an official or a parent or an athletic director or a club director. But you get the special moment in time where you get to use sport as a vehicle to make disciples, to be on the mission of God. So what is the purpose? The purpose is our transformation, which would lead to the transformation of others, and eventually would lead to a world in the new heavens and new earth that is filled with image bearers and not marred by sin anymore. But in the here and now, we get to join God and glorify him in our sanctification and in our multiplication and replication of ourselves in others, which is incredible. And that's the heart behind this, the competing biblically. And we could easily call competing biblically missional competition or something else. Because that's the narrative of the narrative of the scriptures, is God redeeming a people, God redeeming a people, being a kingdom of priests, being a holy nation. It's all about his mission, because when we're on his mission and people's eyes are open to see the glory of God for who he really is, that's when he's glorified, that all his attributes, everything that he is that makes him God, when people bow their knee to that, not just for themselves, but for everyone else around them, man, it is a beautiful thing. And that's the platform that we have through sport, to reach a population. That's the platform that we have. And in our country today, there are over 50 million kids who participate in sport outside of school. Another 7 million that participate in sport scholastically, and then some that participate in college and some that participate beyond that, and some grown-ups like myself who can't let it go and got to find something competitive to do to stay in shape. It's much easier for me to run around and go chase a ball than to just go run. I choose running around chasing a ball over running just for running every day of the week. But man, so much of our population here in America and around the world, you roll a soccer ball out almost anywhere in the world, and there is a relational opportunity to connect. It's a universal language. So that's, I don't know, just as I think about purpose, I think about all these things. I can't help but think about the purpose of glorifying him personally and on mission, on his mission of helping people to see him for who he really is.
And as we close, Nick, I do want to start doing this more. I know we've talked about kind of defining our goal, our win, redefining what it means to win, and I think we've only shared it once or twice on the actual podcast to our listeners on the podcast, but this fits so well, obviously because it's a core piece of what shaped it, but the win, the redefinition of winning with the competing biblically stuff is glorifying God by closing the gap between potential and performance. And this intro spells out the same thing because Wes is saying, don't leave sport because you don't see God in it. Because it's an opportunity for you to learn how to glorify God by closing that gap between our potential and our performance. Because sport is the microcosm of life, and God has gifted you, and you need to use it. And I love what you shared about the talents, Zach. That hit me when you said I was the man with the talent who hit it. So don't abandon. If anyone here is debating their participation as a coach, an athlete, if you're a parent and you're wondering, what role athletics have in your child's life, I challenge you to think upon these things and think about a walk with Christ that is integrated into athletic performance and see what God can use, how God can use sport to shape yourself or whoever it is you care about. Because it is such a powerful transformational tool.
Yeah, I think like Seth, as you're just saying that, a little small thing, like I have been playing lacrosse for I think almost 10, 11, 12 years. And I think as I look back on all the things that I've done, look back on how I viewed my talents given from God and how I buried it, and now I'm trying to invest it. I think when we say reaching our potential based on our performance, like that isn't to be recognized. That isn't to be an incredible athlete. That isn't to make it professionally so you can get a bunch of money. The reason we say that, and I think the reason that I'm so now excited to play this last season of lacrosse is because now I finally see investing my talents in lacrosse and trying to be the best that I can be is just training me for being able to do that in the rest of my life, whether it be another job, whether it be a relationship that I have, whether it be like my marriage, my kids' life, any of that. But most importantly, it is training me on how to be a better Christian day in and day out, of how to develop my relationship with Christ more and more, despite hardship, despite pain, despite wanting to quit, despite adversity, like despite all these things, it's training me on how to become a better Christian. And so like now seeing that, that's why I would encourage everyone to do sports. Like everyone will tell you to do sports. Anyone you find in sports will tell you to participate in sports. But especially as Christians, we are given such a beautiful image of how we are to become like Christ through sports and our development in there. So yeah, definitely echoing what Seth said. If you are questioning your participation, I question my participation for such a long time, but do it for no other reason than you will learn how to develop yourself in your relationship with Christ.
Yeah, when we say glorifying God by closing the gap between potential and performance, if you say, well, what does that perform? Is that spiritual or is that athletic? If there's a dichotomy there, if you see those as two separate things, then I don't think it's quite registering. And I challenge you to think and dive deep, because going back to the first quote we shared from Wes, which is, "It is my desire for Jesus Christ to become the center of your athletic life." If you see those potential and performance, closing that gap between those things as two separate things, athletic and personal, am I chasing to become good athletically, or am I walk with Christ? Then I challenge you whether Jesus Christ is really the center of athletic competition for you, if you view those as two separate things, because our participation becomes an act of worship and an act by which Jesus Christ shapes us and teaches us and molds us. So they aren't two separate things. And I think that's a big point that's made here. And that's one of the core principles of the Competing Biblically framework, is that we're pursuing Christ in the athletic realm, and he is the center, the core of why we participate, how we participate, and how we respond to things that happen when we participate. So I just wanted to leave you with some of those thoughts as a challenge. And wow, great discussion. And that was just the introduction. And I'm actually really excited to talk about chapter 1, because Wes lays out some pretty bold things in chapter 1 that I think are going to challenge us. So like I said, there's some more follow-up with Coach Ron Brown if you want. We'll link the page to the videos in the description. Go check those out. If you want to dive in more, go do that. And if you want to grab this resource, the Handbook on Athletic Perfection, and walk through it with us, please do. It's rewarding, and we'll put that down in the description as well. But until then, we will see you guys next time.